This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl, episode number unbelievably 98.
I don't have my normal microphone. I'm out of town. I'm in South Beach, Miami for a couple days. So if the sound's a little different, that's why.
Nobody's jealous of your location, Tim. I can tell you that.
I don't think so, but I'm having a good time.
I hear you've been having a bit of eye strain, but we don't even need to go into how many inflated super asses you've seen down there of one sort or another. And speaking about super asses,
yes,
just a little Capitol riot update. Lonnie Kaufman of Alabama will remain in Washington, D.C. area jail until his trial, indicted on 17 charges following the seizure of nearly a dozen Molotov cocktail explosive devices, a number of guns, ammo, handwritten notes, and a federal judge on Monday denied his request that authorities reconsider a previous decision to get him behind bars. Now, his truck was parked just a few blocks from the Capitol on January 6th, and he apparently had been living in his truck for a week. And surveillance footage showed that, well, he was ready to explode himself. And the thing is, he's just one of now over 450 people they've arrested in this Capitol riot nonsense.
And counting. The really bad decision, bad beliefs followed by bad decisions usually equal bad results.
I really, they say it must be something in the water. I truly believe they have poisoned at least 30, maybe 50% of the American brains with something in the water, because people are just getting dumber by the fucking day.
A toddler in California, age 2, is now the youngest American member of the American Mensa group with an IQ of 146. It's a young girl, Kasha Quest is her name. And she's 2, or she's like barely 2, and she already knows the periodic table of elements, all of them, all 50 states. I mean, I guess these don't seem like insane, but she's 2. So she's learning Spanish. She can pretty much get by in sign language. She can pretty much read. So now the parents are like, well, what do we do with this? Like, it's still a 2-year-old, and we still don't have to send
her to Harvard. Tim, what do you think that kind of intelligence comes from? I mean, some people, believe in historical memory.
There's cases of people with just like having these parents. It's like some kind of synergistic effect or something. The parents are just kind of average intelligence, and they spit out this like insane genius. And I don't know what that is. It's I mean, it just happens sometimes. Yes, I think if you have 2 morons, chances are you're gonna have a moron kid. Or if you have 2 really bright people, there's a good chance you're gonna have some high intelligence. But when it really gets freakishly high like that, who fucking knows?
There's no. You're taking a crapshoot anytime you decide to shit one out. Let's face it. You can get lucky, or you can breed a Ted Bundy.
Well, having an extremely high IQ doesn't necessarily mean that's lucky. I mean, it's how do you manage that? How's that directed? It can be a curse. I mean, in many situations, yeah.
Well, check back with me when the toddler turns 5.
Exactly. Now we're talking.
Well, speaking of the opposite again of, this is kind of a toddler who's an idiot. More lawsuits for Trump. The Chinese American Civil Rights Coalition wants $23 million. That's $1 for every Asian American in the USA from that toddler Trump, who repeatedly, as we all know, referred to COVID-19 as the Chinese virus, the, Kung flu, the Wuhan virus. And the lawsuit says that, of course, obvious. What are we seeing now? The derogatory terms contributed to the recent rise in violence against Chinese and Asian Americans. Now, just to summarize, and I love numbers, you can believe them or not, but I did a little research. And in the past 3 decades, I mean, this guy, every cell in his body should be in a different prison cell. In the last 3 decades, Trump has faced, I can't even believe it, 4,095 lawsuits. Now, let me just break that down. 85 trademark issues, 17 campaign lawsuits, 1,863 casino cases, 208 labor disputes, 63 golf club cases, 190 government and tax evasion issues, 14 defamation suits, 697 personal injury cases, 622 real estate cases. I'm going to stop there. Every cell of his body should be in a different prison cell. When will it end?
How many of these has he lost?
Well, I mean, does it matter? He just keeps adding up crimes.
It doesn't, but it's just like, what happens? Like, he's losing, he doesn't pay people off? What's going on?
He has avoided the long arm of the law so far, and at this point, there's going to be 2 hands around his neck, and hopefully that of his duplicitous children any day now. It's got to stop.
Well, if with the Southern District, they're going out, if New York's just going after him, basically, the stuff that's coming up, the lawsuits are coming up and things are going to be tried. If they are dismissed, it's almost a guarantee he's going to be the president again. He's going to be like, we'll see. We'll see.
Not going to happen. The Southern District of New York is pretty freaking hardcore. I don't think they're going to give up that easily. All right, give me something else.
Here's a thread. I guess you'll hear where the thread's connected here. So a Texas woman was caught feeding hot Cheetos to spider monkeys at the El Paso Zoo.
I'm joking on a Cheeto.
She was feeding them, and the videotape got out. Immediately, she was fired from her job at a law firm, and the law firm called her behavior, quote unquote, irresponsible and reckless. And they send their thoughts out to the spider monkeys from their traumatic experience. So
it just goes to prove no matter what your education doesn't mean you're intelligent.
Just if you're working in a law firm, don't feed spider monkeys hot Cheetos because you're gonna get fired.
I wouldn't mind feeding Kim Kardashian, who just failed her bar exam, to a hot Cheeto monkey. I didn't know if she was taking that exam. Well, her father. Let's not go over his crimes that he died of embarrassment for allowing OJ to get off. But she has been studying 10 to 12 hours a day for the past 6 weeks. No wonder she friggin' failed.
Oh my God!
Now, Tim, you just took a flight, and you'll take another one soon. I gotta warn you about this. Now, since January 1st, the Federal Aviation Agency has received approximately 2,500 reports of unruly behavior by passengers, including 1,900 reports of passengers refusing to comply with face mask mandates.
I saw a few of those yesterday.
Well, two of the latest incidents. This one was on Southwest Airlines at a flight. I mean, it's only going from Sacramento to San Diego, but some wildcat, Vivian Canones, was charged with felony battery and causing serious bodily harm. She attacked a flight attendant and knocked 2 of her front teeth out. I guess she didn't want to buckle her seatbelt. The thing is, high fines right now, but I got to go into this is one of my favorite ones of the past week. And again, how dumb do you have to friggin' be? Mark Skirbo stands accused of brandishing a knife, snorting cocaine in full view of his seatmates, and acting so aggressive that the pilot had to divert a JetBlue flight traveling from New York to Seattle and divert it to Minneapolis. Now, he claimed, that was Skirbo, that he was the Prophet Genghis Khan, accused his seatmate of being a CIA agent, and then making insulting comments to her. Now, the affidavit that was filed in Minnesota, it provides even a few more details, which I find interesting. Allegations that on the JetBlue Mint business class, again, it doesn't matter how rich or smart you're supposed to be, threw his food on the floor, grabbed a metal butter knife from his tray, brandishing while walking up and down the aisle in full view of a young child, dipping his finger into a bag. It's supposed to be 24 grams of white powder that authorities said was cocaine, and ending up with
24 grams. How did you get that on the plane?
They check for metal, not powder. Although then he ended up with white powder all over his mustache, his face, and his pants. Then he's going to the bathroom 6 times and doing yoga. Well, that in itself on a plane.
I mean, Lydia, when you're that far off the rails, I can't believe that you even people get on the plane. So when they're that bonkers, it's like
maybe they didn't check. Maybe they didn't check his massive anal cavity. But at this point, people are getting charged $10,000 to $15,000 to $35,000 for causing trouble on planes. And I mean, just 2,500 episodes since in the first almost 6 months of this year. Ugh. Be safe on your return, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, it's so weird. I mean, the plane I was on was pretty jam packed. It was a huge fucking plane. It was like one that you'd see on an international flight. It had like going to Miami. It was like 3 seats on both sides, where the windows are, and then they had like 4 or 5 seats right, like 4 in the middle. It was like one of those like internet, and it was jam packed. It was like, oh god, what the fuck's going on? I guess they're just trying to maximize and be efficient as possible by cramming people in like sardines. Now that it's been officially announced that you don't have to wear masks anymore. So I hope that goes well. I mean,
it's dangerous on the ground, in the air. I'm certainly safe in my own home. But is anybody who comes here safe from me? I'm not sure.
Right. Well, the air, JFK was pretty empty though. It's still not, it's not moving like it used to. So, but the airplane, all right, I'm gonna move on. Yes. So there was a bakery burglar who got caught. They're like, what's going on? This guy broke into my bakery and they ran off all his money and all that stuff. They got his face, and the bakery owner was like, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna basically turn his wanted poster into cookies. So with certain pastries now you can do like a photo and they can kind of do this sugar print of it. So she started distributing these cookies of this guy who turns out to be Dominic Culp, 45. The guy was caught not in hours, he was caught in minutes. Like basically it was like, hey, these are good cookies. I know who that guy is. So including his ex-wife, who's like, he's denying it. Of course, she's like, that's definitely him. And now that he's been arrested, there's been a second batch of cookies released of his mugshot.
Nice.
Mugshot.
Oh, well, I mean, this makes me kind of sorry that I missed for your birthday making a cake of course, not as overinflated as all the asses you've been looking at in Miami, but I should have made you an ass cake. Maybe next year. I'll think.
That'd be cool. That'd be cool.
Well, I'm going no further with that. But just the ridiculousness of this. First of all, I love this first name. I've never heard of it before. Dartavius Barnes suing the cops after they pulled him over in search for drugs in an urn that contained the ashes of his 2-year-old daughter. And by the way, the guy was already in agony because he had the ashes of his 2-year-old daughter because she was starved to death by the wicked mother who's now in jail for murder. So he's pulled over in Springfield, Illinois, allegedly for speeding, cooperated with the cops, said they could search his car. And the video shows the cops, with a small container saying, oh, this is either meth or ecstasy. And the poor Dartavius is like, yo, no, bro, that's my daughter. What are you doing? And the cops are heard joking about the incident, saying they had pissed him off by testing the dead baby's ashes. Well, you know what? I'm glad he's suing the city of Springfield, Illinois. This is just, first of all, you would think cops would know the difference between ecstasy, meth, and baby's ashes. First of all, they've created enough human ashes from all the people that have been either buried or cremated from their violent tendencies. And it's not as if cops don't do drugs. I've seen it before.
Right. Well, they're around all that shit. So,
maybe if the entire U.S. police force were dosed with ecstasy, they'd mellow out a bit. I don't know. That's just my method of dealing. All right.
Perhaps.
Tie it up with something good, Timmy.
I guess this is good in the sense that there's going to be an effort. So a lot of cities around the country are going to start really dimming their skyline lights at night because a report just came out where it's this is insane, an estimated 1 billion birds are killed flying into skyscrapers in America every year because something about the lights at night when they're migrating birds, it disorients them and they get confused and there's just slamming into these things. And so there's, I don't know, all these animal protection
rights activists, right?
Yeah, all that stuff. They're basically like, hey, this is actually an environmental disaster. And we have to actually start like modifying like these giant things that we put in the sky.
Well, because they're not flying by sight, they're flying by radar. So I wonder if what's throwing them off, but still, that's a big number of birds.
1 billion, that's insane. And basically, there's obviously different migratory patterns, and some that are more nocturnal, or a lot of birds, especially the ones that go over hemispheres, they don't really ever stop flying. Because I remember one time I was looking up, I was like, well, how long do felines sleep a day, and canines? You know, they sleep more than humans.
Right.
But then I was like, well, what
about
animals
birds?
never sleep?
Right.
What animals never sleep? And the things that never really sleep are the ones
Giraffe?
that sleep the least. Giraffes, about a half hour a day. Certain dolphins, they actually kind of never sleep. Half their brain, like one hemisphere will sleep, and then the other one, so they kind of go into a half sleep. But there are some migratory birds that I think they'll fly for like, they'll be up for like 150 days.
Well, Jim, that's why I've been referred to as a flipper before, because I'm kind of like the dolphin. One half of my brain goes to sleep. The other half takes a walk around the block and looks for statistics to shout out. I got no clue. I've got no idea what's going on. Anyway.
Maybe tied up with this. So it looks like the Ghislaine Maxwell trials is going to come through very soon. I actually forgot to write down the exact date. Dershowitz is now suing Netflix on the documentary about the whole thing. And basically all of Epstein's like little scouts that would go out there and like
coming out. Like, coming out.
They're all turning on her. So this is going to be an interesting trial. I'm curious. She's still alive, I guess. So I guess she's going to she hasn't been killed.
Well, I mean, and you know, the two cops that were sleeping on the job or whatever when Epstein supposedly committed suicide, they just pled guilty.
It's like embarrassing thing that people just don't want to remember. Like America just kind of wants to forget that because it's just so stupid. It's like, oh yeah, the security guards fell asleep during that hour that the video machine broke. It's like, and then he's dead. Huh? Oh, that just
you know, that it went on for so long, and then it took a female, journalist from, I think it was the Miami Times, that broke the story. And this was, a decade ago that this has all been going on, and now finally, let's release those names, because that black book, thousands of names.
Yeah, well, and that's the rumor. Yeah, Melania is Melinda Gates is divorcing Bill Gates, and one
of the reasons, I'm sure.
One of the reasons. And so yeah, I've talked about this before, where everyone likes to talk about the high level politicians and the TV or whatever movie celebrities that were on that list. Huge. The majority are these elite scientists, MIT, the top institutions, just nerds who are seduced with whatever Epstein was seducing them with. Basically, to get information, to get like top secret information.
Right. Well, and let's hope that the Matt Gaetz case closes up a little bit sooner, like hopefully any day now, because I'm sick of seeing that freak's face. All I'm saying. This is the Lydian Spin, episode number 98. Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and our special guest, the incredible writer, especially of the Lower East Side from 1914 to the present, Luc Sante. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and our special guest, Luc Sante, author of, by last count, 8 books, the latest being Maybe the People Would Be the Times. I consider him a poetic forensic detective almost. He's always undertaking ghosts, especially of the Lower East Side, which no longer exist. And I just want to start this interview by quoting you from a Brooklyn Rail article that was just published with the Delberté, friends of both of ours. And this is what you said there. We were hooligans for many reasons. We were bohemians without the mysticism of the Beats and the hippies. We lived minimally in ruined surroundings with few mainstream amenities. We felt ourselves separate from much of the world outside of our own world, especially the United States of bad culture and bad politics. Many of us lived as if the rest of the U.S. didn't exist, which was possible to do then, pre-internet. Most of us didn't have television. Many didn't even read newspapers. For some, 14th Street was a frontier between nations to be crossed with trepidation. Half of us were women. Many of us were gay. Many of us felt that capitalism was a vast mechanism of theft and degradation. But we were not an organized force of resistance. We were hooligans. We were the rats in the temple, living off discards and invisibly undermining the structure. Now, I don't know if you wrote that or just said that, but that is what I call poetic forensics. Welcome, Luc Sante.
Thank you, Lydia.
Welcome. Just reading up on your biography,
you got your hands in so much stuff. It's kind of amazing. But let's go to the beginning. So you're born in Belgium, and what inspired you to flee near Liège, right? In the western part.
East of Liège.
That's it's a French part. It's
yes. We're very, very close to the German-speaking part.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a very small part, right? That little corner. And I'm curious. Well, we can talk about that. That's not. I'm just digressing. So, why did you leave? What brought you here?
Well, my whole family did. Because,
okay. I didn't know that.
The textile industry that had sustained my town since the Middle Ages began to fall apart in the 50s. And everybody in my family was employed by them, so jobs went away, so we had to go somewhere. My dad had a friend who was a war bride, married a guy from New Jersey, so we ended up in New Jersey.
Okay, amazing. Because I was looking here, isn't wool? Yeah, textile. Wool is, there's like a wool museum there.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
How old were you when you migrated to New Jersey?
Well, we actually did it like 4 times, and the first time I was not quite 5, and the last time I was not quite 9.
Do you go back? Do you ever go back to Belgium, and do you have family you visit, or?
At this point, all the old people are dead, and I'm not close to my cousins. I was going back all the time in the 90s. I wrote a book about it. But
which book was that? Look, which book was that you wrote about Belgium?
It's called The Factory of Facts. And
is that more like an autobiography? There. Is that more of an autobiography?
More or less, yeah. It's an autobiography that's really not about me, if I can put it that way.
Well, that's kind of your specialty, is writing biographies of places that you might have been in or you might have not been in. I'm just thinking of a book that I had for quite a long time, Evidence, which is Evidence, full title being NYPD Crime Scenes 1914 to 1918, which is a collection. I mean, it's great because it's post-Ouija in a sense that it's 55 photographs taken by the New York City Police Department, and they're beautiful, brutal. And I like this line that I'm quoting from Publishers Weekly or whatever, that readers learn less about what happened then than where it happened, about the bedrooms, the hallways, the railroad tracks, the subway stations, the cellars, the bar rooms of New York City 75 years ago.
Lydia just mentioned Ouija, and you have that book on folk photography. I was seeing, it feels like almost all photography up until a certain point was kind of folk photography or folk art, because it was many communities didn't consider photography even art at all until not even that long ago. I mean, would you consider Ouija or Diane Arbus a folk photographer or Winogrand or anything? You wouldn't. Okay.
No, because see, Ouija came up through the newspapers.
And
Diane Arbus, of course, with her husband, started a fashion photography studio. Winogrand started with magazines.
Okay.
The people in folk photography are truly isolated. This is, in the years before World War I. Mostly.
Yep. Okay.
And they're out in 5-horse villages in the Great Plains. And they're hours away from the nearest city, if not days, by train. So all the conventions they come up with they have to make them up themselves, or they get it through other postcards they get in the mail, etc. So they're really self-taught, as opposed to these other photographers you mentioned who come out of some kind of tradition.
I mean, I feel that photography and with writing, I mean, I think it's so important, because if somebody that considers myself a journalist, and here we have now this audio museum, and we're talking to you, who's a journalistic, forensic, poetical investigator based on your own experience, other people's experience. I just find it's so important also to have both things together. I'm so impressed with Evidence and your books when you do marry those two things. To me, it's just, well, before TV, that's what we had.
Mm-hmm.
You finally, after going back and forth, you settle in New Jersey, and then you go to college in New York City.
Well, I went to high school in New York City, first of all. That was the big revelation.
Okay.
I was commuting every day to high school in New York. Wow. And I eventually got kicked out because I was in New York, and who's going to keep me in class when I've got this gigantic candy box in front of me, right? So I started, and it was September 68 when I started. The city was jumping in a lot of different ways. So yeah, and then I had to go back for college and then live there another 25 years or so.
Oh wait, just stop at college for a minute because there were some library fines or something that prevented you from getting degrees at college. What's that story?
Well, it's true that I had library fines, but mostly I had 9 incompletes because somewhere in the middle of junior year, I basically stopped attending classes. And I could have just like taken a leave of absence, but my parents, who both left school at 14, thought that I'd lose my scholarship if I did that. So I just like slept my way through the rest of college.
Tell us the years you were at Columbia, Luke, to give us a reference.
I was there 72 to 76. The last Columbia riot was in the spring of 72. I started in the fall. I went to the last SDS meeting on campus.
Okay.
People have no idea how desolate New York was in the early 70s and up until, the late 70s. It was extremely desolate. It was bankrupt. It was crime ridden. It was gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
So you're at Columbia. Are you living up near Columbia? Where are you living? How are you getting by?
Yeah, I was living in Morningside Heights up there, just south of Harlem, and I had a job in the library. That's how I got by, and everything was pretty cheap.
My first apartment cost $75 on the Lower East Side in 76. Who were your favorite writers at that time when going to school? Like, who really, you're like, okay, that's giving me the go to carry on and do what I have to do?
Well, at the time I was a poet, and I was really into the New York school people, Frank O'Hara. I studied with Kenneth Koch, John Ashbery, and also the Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs. And
the beauty about being a poet, Luke, I've never seen an ad that said poet wanted.
Yeah.
We're kind of ridiculous that way. Go ahead. Allen Ginsberg, carry on. No, I want the list.
Oh, all those people. I mean, you have to realize that it was not a money-making thing, but nobody was making money at that point. And poetry was actually kind of hip in the early 70s.
Right.
The St. Mark's Poetry Project was where it was at. There weren't really, I guess this is around the time the Mercer Arts Center was going, but there wasn't much like music. There was a little bit of film. There was some really recondite kind of art stuff going on, but poetry seemed to have all the life force.
Let's talk about the Mercer Arts Center just for a second, because New York Dolls, Alan Vega, Suicide, this is like early 70s, 73. What's interesting is there might not have been a lot of music, but the music that was happening was extreme. And then there was also poetry. When I came to New York, like the poetry scene or the spoken word scene didn't really, it was like, there was nothing going on right then. I had to create my own, but understandable. Words are so important still. They're still the most. So you have these poets and they are in New York. Did you meet a lot of them at that time? Because they're performing at St. Mark's.
Well, I met a lot of them. I was studying with Kenneth, so I met John Ashbery and the first generation New York school. And then later on, 78, actually 79, I lived in the Poets Building, which is where Allen Ginsberg and Peter Orlovsky and like at least a dozen New York school poets of the second and third generations were living too. So it was like a building that was mostly poets.
Were you already writing at that point? Were you performing or just writing, or were you just gathering? You were writing already.
Yeah, I was writing, and I didn't really publish much except in little magazines, and stuff. And I should also mention, by the way, in terms of spoken word poets, I saw Patti Smith in 73, and that kind of changed my life. That was really an event.
I think Piss Factory is one of the greatest singles ever released. In my opinion, she didn't have to do anything after that because it's so amazing. And that was very early in her career. But you've since written so many articles and so many books. But so you're writing, are you sharing your stuff at these? You're surrounded by these possible icons. Are you just like, all right, I'm writing. So what?
Well, yes and no. I was very ambitious and I was also very shy. So I wasn't like, except in class, I wasn't going and bothering these famous people with my writings. I wouldn't have done that. I had to wait till I got better to do that, which was, I probably could have played my cards better there, but it was all right. So I was
Yeah, well,
writing.
you're the last man standing, honey, and you definitely proved your mark. So, basically most of them are either dead or haven't done much lately. So I guess you came out on top eventually. Shy and ambitious, a very strange combination. Go ahead. Sorry.
I know, that's me.
Is there anyone in America who doesn't teach in a university that makes a living as a poet?
Yeah, really, that's a good question.
No, I actually don't know. I mean, Galway Cannell died a few years ago. Was he teaching anywhere?
He might have been. I didn't know him, but
Luke, when I heard the term beat poetry, I thought it was a physical thing. All I'm saying. Oh, trust me, I prove it all the time. Look, I was bold, and the only person that would listen to my poetry who wouldn't run away from me was Lenny Kaye. When I first got to New York, because I came to New York to do spoken word, but it was post Patti Smith and everything that came before it, and not spoken word as opposed to poetry. It wasn't really there yet. Yeah. And I had to really carve out by curating a lot of shows and bringing people to that. And it was not a popular format, nor is it now. But however, the word must go on, as we've both proven. Thank you very much for doing that. Let's talk about your latest book for a minute, and then we can go back and forth. It's such an incredible depiction of a time that no longer is, and it's so important for people that weren't there and have the nostalgia, because I don't think what you're writing is nostalgic. It's a curation of a time that no longer exists because of a lot of factors. And besides that, it's poetic. So it is a forensic investigation, and it's so important that these documents remain. So the latest book is again called Maybe the People Would Be the Times. Tell us a little bit about that.
The title, it's a title, or it's half the title of a song by Arthur Lee, which appears on Love Forever Changes, which is one of my very favorite records. And it's referring to the Whiskey A Go-Go, because the second part of the title is Or Between Clark and Hilldale, which is on the Sunset Strip between Clark and Hilldale was where the Whiskey A Go-Go was, and where the riots occurred in the summer of '67 and all of that. And even though, people keep saying, why did you call it that when your book is not about Los Angeles? Well,
it doesn't matter. It's a good title.
Context, yeah. But, it really is about this image that occurs at the end of that essay where, like, I suddenly see everybody with their expiration date marked on their heads. And it was not the time when they died, but rather the last time they were in sync with the cultural moment. And everybody hits that point, and I was like, just at the end of mine and noticing, like, there were hippies, there were like circa 77 punks, circa 78 punks, and you could differentiate them all by their clothing and hairstyle and stuff like that.
It's such an important document of that period. And by the way, this is a sideline, but I don't remember where you mentioned this, but I love that in one of your essays you mentioned one of my favorite weird songs, Sally Go Round the Roses.
Oh, yeah. Yes,
which is such a weird song, and most people have never heard it. It's a creepy song, female vocalist, have no idea what they're talking about. It's just creepy, and it's beautiful. And it's kind of post doo-wop. I don't know where it fits into the schism of anything, but I love that you mentioned that. And, Adele and I used to do a lot of dancing to soul and all kinds of stuff. So, but you and Adele worked at the Strand bookstore at the same time.
That's right. Yeah.
How did you survive the dust mites?
Well, I was lucky. I was a floater. I got to work all 3 floors, so I wasn't stuck in the basement in a corner like so many other people were. So I think, even though I was ruining my lungs in other ways, at least I survived that.
There were a lot of people in the music scene that worked at the Strand around then. Tell us a few, because I never, I was a little bit wiser than working a 9 to 5. I would work like 5 minutes and make $10, and that's all I need. But who else worked? Who else worked at this?
Those were the days.
I charge by the second now, Tim. Don't forget.
All right.
Who else was working at the Strand, either in '77 or around that time? How long did you work there, Luke?
I worked there 3 years, 76, 79. I'd missed Tom Verlaine and Richard Hell by a few years, but in my time, Lux Interior worked there for a month. A lot of people. And then, the No Wave. Your band made Bradley Field. At least.
I'm surprised he didn't burn the Strand down, because I met him when he was trying to burn a homeless person.
Yeah.
So he failed. He tried, but it failed.
I stomped the guy out. Come on. And then
Did he live after that? Was that the better solution?
Both of them lived. One to tell the tale and play in Teenage Jesus, and the other to go back to the Bowery Hotel above CBGB's.
All right. Okay.
Who were some of your monumental bands that you saw at that time?
Oh man. Well, just simply because I'm thinking of them for other reasons. I remember seeing the Young Marble Giants at Tier 3, which was one of the great concerts ever. Well, there were the bands that were around that were our friends that we saw all the time, which were, I mean, the early CBGB lineup, the Ramones, Blondie, etc. And then, you guys,
the pop groups before we came in to destroy it.
Yeah. And, visiting English bands. And then when things started changing up in the early 80s and you started getting people like ESG and Liquid, all the rhythm-based bands, which were very much my taste. But there was so much music. I mean, I saw reggae, I saw salsa, I saw jazz and jazz lofts. I saw James Brown at the Apollo. There's so much music.
Did you stop going to hear and see live music at some point, or do you still continue to do that? So outside of pandemic restrictions?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of did for a while because I felt, it was just too difficult to get into places in the city. It was too crowded and expensive. I live in Kingston, New York, and we had a great club until the pandemic. They went out of business.
Wait, Quinn's? What was it? Which place? No.
BSP, Backstage Productions.
Okay.
They had like a cluster of 3 clubs actually, and I saw some great Cibo Mato. Let's see, part of Stereo Lab. Lots of like not major acts, but they turned in great performances, and it was really loose and relaxed and not too crowded. It was perfect.
Right.
How about some of the first I saw? I don't know if you were there, but the first concert of Richard Hell and the Voidtoids. Now that to me was monumental.
Yeah, I think I might have been there. I think I remember that being the loudest concert I'd ever been to as well.
I guess you never saw ZZ Top, but that's another story. Not on the same page, but Richard Hell and the Voidtoids with Robert Klein was, I mean, that first album was so, it is like almost, it is a document of the period as well. Because I mean, that was his peak. Unfortunately, he kind of fell into the East River after that. Let's talk about teaching for a minute. Is that just a natural, or it comes to that eventually between books?
I taught at Columbia for a while, briefly at the New School, and now at Bard. And I'll tell you, I mean, it's not that much money because I'm really part-time. I only teach 1 class a week.
Okay.
But health benefits.
Okay. Are you tenured as a part-time or no?
No, I just.
But you get health benefits. Okay. Yep.
I get health benefits, and also my son is going to college there for free.
Oh, there you go. Is your son going there now?
Look, I'm an orphan and I'm ready for adoption anytime. I could use the health benefits. I'm just saying. But anyway, I have played at Bard once with Thurston Moore, who opened for me because he was a person who did my very first spoken word show was Thurston Moore. I'm ready to come back to Bard at any time. Just let me know.
I played there many times, but then I don't know that this concert, a lot of bands were playing there. And then about 5 years ago, it just kind of stopped. I think they lost their budget for, I don't know. Who knows?
Teaching is not easy, even 1 day a week. I mean, so what are you just exposing students to things they might not know? What are you teaching them there, Luke?
Well, I teach 2 things. I mean, in the fall, I teach history of photography.
Cool.
I do a, narrated slideshow. And in the spring, I teach writing, and that's hands-on and, critiquing and blah, blah, blah.
I know who taught me about music. I don't know who taught me about authors that I came to.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and you were in New York at a time when a lot of people you respected were on the scene at that point.
Yes.
I think it's so important to educate people to what they might not know about, especially in music, art, literature. That's why we do the podcast. That's why we have you on here. They need to know who you are.
And we educated one another, I don't know. I mean, that must still go on, but, books were handed back and forth and go around the circle and everybody's read this. And, and a lot of these books were not well known. They just somehow somebody had heard about them. And it was a bit like the way we picked up on music, before the internet, it was rumors. It was the what I call in the book, actually, the invisible teenage telegraph. I mean, everybody would get the news somehow, and nobody quite could pin down how.
I dropped out of high school at 15 because they wanted me to read John Steinbeck after I'd already read the Marquis de Sade, Henry Miller, and Hubert Selby. I'm like, I will write. I will not read. And my English teacher fortunately said, "You don't belong here." I said, "No, I don't." And I walked out the frickin' door.
Have you ever gone through any Steinbeck books, Lydia?
No.
Not one. Okay.
I will not. And
All
by the
right.
way,
I've read some.
Yeah, me too. I read The Wayward Bus. I like that one.
After John Fante, I just felt Steinbeck, it didn't speak to me. After Selby, after Henry Miller, Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, I don't want to know.
So let's go to photography for a second, because this book on folk photography, if that's the title, correct? Maybe you know this. Is there any photography at the American Folk Art Museum in Manhattan?
That's a really good question.
I feel like there isn't.
Yeah.
Which seems strange to me. That seems like a hole.
How did evidence and the pictures from the New York Police Department, 1914 to 1918, fall into your lap, Luke? I don't think they just fell into your lap. I feel you had to do a little footwork there. Tell us about that.
Well, I was doing picture research for my first book, which is called Low Life. It was about New York, blah, blah. And when I went to the municipal archives, one of the curators said, "Have you seen our police files?" And they trucked out these ring binders, and I was amazed. And furthermore, there were so many mysteries. I mean, why were these taken? Because as evidence, they're filled with holes. They've moved the body from one picture to the next. And also, I thought they were all the work of one photographer who was a great stylist, but it turned out to be a bunch of cops from the fingerprinting department. And the style all came from the equipment and, just the conditions under which they were produced. So, it opened up a lot of questions. It was fun to talk about forensic investigation that did involve a lot of digging, and I resolved most of the mysteries to my satisfaction there.
Have you seen the recent Sons of Sam 4-part series on Netflix? Because you were in New York during the Son of Sam.
It. Yeah.
It's really amazing, actually. And I mean, the interesting thing is, I don't know if it was a Muck Books or I don't know if it was Adam Parfrey or George Petros that put out a book on the Process Church, mainly on the British contingent. I thought it was horrifying. We were in New York during the Summer of Sam. And it's a really interesting series, and it just goes to prove again, like so many of these series, I'm thinking of like The Ripper, which is also great, about the Yorkshire Ripper, how police are just incompetent and fucked up. And The Letter, I mean, Jimmy Breslin was one of my favorite journalists, hardcore New York journalist, and that these letters were sent to him, and they're not the same writing calligraphy. And by the way, you know who's a great forensic calligrapher is the lead singer from Sha Na Na. He is now
that's so funny. Bowser?
Yes, because he read all the contracts. I'm a forensic freak, so he read all the contracts, and then and there is a forensic. Did this person really write this suicide letter or not? But anyway, back to the Son of Sam letter, of which he sent to Jimmy Breslin, which had so many clues, and the fact that the guy who had a photographic memory was convinced that a kid he went to school with, who lived right next to David Berkowitz. It's a really good special. We were there when it happened.
That's right. Do you know what was the final incarnation of the Process Church of the Final Judgment?
Tell me.
It was a dog sanctuary in Utah.
Enough said. Terrifying. That scares me.
Marianne de Grimston. Yes, she was the last torchbearer. I mean, I think that the two sons of Sam, the two actual sons of Sam, they were involved. But as far as the Process Church, I think that's a lot of baloney, frankly.
Well, look, I just want to focus on the letter as the Bowser, the forensic.
It's my favorite one.
As the forensic calligrapher, part 2, that the letter, which has so many clues about the street, the names, it is not in Berkowitz's writing. By the way, we've seen evidence of that. It's just the incompetence of police. It's really one of the best documentaries on a mystery, in a sense, that is still slightly unsolved. This is what I spend my nights doing, because I don't spend my nights with you investigating what we've already experienced. You're writing about that. Not that I'm trying to forget it. We were there. All I'm saying, Summer of Sam. We lived it. Would you like to bless us with a short reading?
Okie doke.
Thank you so much. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Luc Sante. What are you going to read from for us today for our enjoyment?
I'm going to read the first section of a piece called ESP. Very late that night, riding home on the train as it shoots past the graffiti-washed vacant stations on the local track, they stare straight ahead, unable to explain or articulate the sense of dread that fills them both, except by reference to the lateness of the hour, or the ebbing of the drugs, or the onset of a cold. The nearly empty train is going too fast, and it leans around curves as if the wheels on one side have lost contact with the track, and the lights periodically wink off for as much as a minute at a time. They sit slumped in a double seat next to a door. Whenever the train stops at a station, the doors open and nothing comes in, an almost palpable nothing. Neither bothers to look because they can feel it slide in and take its place among the already assembled nothing. The air is heavy with the weight of an earlier week, when it was still summer in the streets above. The light breaks up into particles. Down here the night could last forever. The song is Florence by the Paragons. Mind if I play it for you? Here it is, on the best of Winley Records, Volume 7 of the Golden Groups on the Relic label, an ancient copy with varicolored stains on the back of the sleeve and a skip in the middle of the cut in question. The skip is annoying, but it also feels like a part of the fabric, along with the hollow-centered production, the dogged piano like the labor of an accompanist at a grade school assembly, the groans of the four supporting paragons, and the agony of Julius McMichael's falsetto lead. It's a daredevil performance, a miracle of endurance. He sounds as if he will dissolve into coughing and retching, or perhaps even drop dead before the end of the track. The song wants to be a ballad, but keeps turning into a dirge. It's so ghostly you can't imagine it ever sounding new. Then doo-wop is a spectral genre. It actually happened on street corners. What transpired in the recording studio afterward might sound posthumous. Florence happened below street level. It happened in a cave, in an abandoned warehouse, in an unknown room 8 stories under Grand Central Station at 5 o'clock in the morning. Probably it took place in an impersonal studio off Times Square, paneled with that white pasteboard stuff gridded with holes, with folding chairs and ashtrays and demi-tasse-sized paper cups of water and a battered upright piano. Probably the Paragons got a $20 advance apiece, if that, and then he took the subway home to East Tremont or wherever it was they came from. Florence has reached our couple 2 decades after its release through the medium of oldies radio, a medium of chattering middle-aged men, audibly overweight, short-sleeved even in the dead of winter, who are capable of putting on the spookiest sides without seeming to notice the weirdness as they jabber on about trivia before and after. Vocal harmonizing became oldies in 1959 when it was still kicking, a premature burial, but a phenomenon that allowed records that had sold 100 copies in the Bronx when new to suddenly go nationwide and become phantom hits a couple of years later. But Florence cuts through the format with his breathtaking weirdness. The piano, the groans, the keening falsetto, it comes on as Martian. Oh, Florence, you're an angel from a world up above, raves the singer in a dog whistle register that symbolically indicates the purity and intensity of his passion, while an Arctic wind blows through any room where the song is played. Naturally, our couple don't know that each has Florence playing on the internal soundtrack, not that either would be surprised. The hour, the chill, the sticky yellow light, the vertical plunge from a high, all call down Florence. The moment could feel merely depressed, small time, pathetic, but Florence in its strangeness lends it magnificence. They feel heroically tragic in their stupor. Florence places the moment in the corridor of history, makes it an episode, emphasizes its romance and fragility in proximity to heartbreak, suggests that a contrasting scene will follow directly. Now they've emerged into the weak pre-dawn light of the street. The place is empty except for garbage trucks. The traffic light runs through its repertory of colors to no effect. They still haven't spoken, not in an hour or more. Words feel too huge to shovel onto their tongues. The lack of traffic is convenient, since their reflexes are too slow to negotiate any. They walk side by side down the street of shuttered stores, each plodding step a small conquest of space. The apartment seems impossibly distant, their progress the retreat from Moscow. At this hour, time doesn't exist, actually. The hour just before dawn looks like night, but with all of night's glamour stripped away. And although habit assumes that dawn will soon arrive and peel back the sky, there's no real evidence of this. Darkness clutches the world and will not give it up. The calendar year is an even flimsier proposition. Only the 24-hour newsstands maintain it, here and there shouting into the void like street corner proselytizers. The year is a random set of 4 digits that may or may not coincide with the information imparted by the posters weak pasted on the windows of empty storefronts. In all probability, Florence has not yet been composed or recorded. Our couple has imagined it. When they awaken the following afternoon, they won't remember how it visited them.
Oh, chills, because you are the ghost master, placing ghost upon ghost of possibility and existence when people might not even know, have no experiential differentiation between what is real and what is not, but exist in this ether of an alternative realm which you pry into and decode for us. Thank you. That was Luc that was Luc Sante reading from his article called ESP.
Are you a fan of doo-wop? I would think so. I didn't realize Joe Pesci, he was a doo-wopper, and he sings a lounge act now with, I think, Joey DeFrancesco on organ, but that's his true love, is singing. And of course, heavy metal singer Ronnie James Dio was a doo-wopper before he went into heavy metal, reinvented himself. You can find it all on YouTube, his old doo-wop group.
Luke, a song with no vocalization, but around the period of doo-wop that I always felt very chilling, Harlem Nocturne.
Oh, yeah. Earl Bostic, yeah.
Doo-wop is creepy. It is dark alley on a Sunday night and it's raining, and there's 2 or 4 guys singing because they might be shot any minute. And I love the way that Suicide, the group, incorporated doo-wop, because I thought they were pre-punk, post or pre-industrial doo-wop love songs.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, you make the art that you love, and sometimes it's not always, but
doo-wop.
So let's talk about your book, Low Life. Very interesting subject, and wow, talk about this book a little bit.
Well, I've been living downtown for a bunch of years, and I was really interested in the buildings where I lived. I always wished, like, back when you used to take out books from the library and there'd be the name of everybody who'd read the book before you. I wish there was, that doesn't exist anymore, but I wish there was that for apartments. Like, there'd be a register, like everybody who lived in, starting in 1901.
Look, I love that idea so much, because that is I love looking into other people's windows, because I feel I try to read the history of all the love and disaster. I know exactly what you're talking about. Carry on.
And, I mean, the building I lived in on 12th Street, one of the victims of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in 1911 had lived there, Some guys approached me and said, "We want you to write a book. What do you want to write a book about?" And I just blurted out, "I want to write a history of the slums." And that's sort of more or less what it was, although there was so much material, and it was my first book and I didn't really know what I was doing. So I cut it off. I mean, I was going to take it all the way up to the present, but I couldn't. So it's 1840 to 1919.
That's a pretty heavy time.
Well, it's up to the last building
Right.
of tenements, really. They stopped building tenements around then. So that was, and then Prohibition complicated everything too. So it's about New York, and it's about eternal recurrences too, which a lot of that has been lost. But even in the 80s and 90s, there was still there was a continuity between Tompkins Square Park as like a center of labor activity and the kind of radical activity that was still taking place then there. There were still like lines of prostitutes on Delancey Street where they'd been for 150 years, this kind of thing I was looking for. And so it's just my approach to New York City, and it's mixed messages, and also I wanted to do New York City without any rich people or celebrities.
I guess you're saying up until recently, but that's more I always see it as the transition from the analog to the digital, and that all the degenerate behavior is now kind of shifting into this digital realm. I mean, it's just not there on the streets. It's kind of,
well, it's about money.
Yep.
Come on,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
about the fact that you have to have like a square job, and a big square job, to afford to live in these tenement apartments that we had for $75 or $125.
We're gonna see where it goes,
Yeah.
because a lot of people are, especially all this office space with all the remote learning that's going to happen. They built so much stuff in the last few years in Manhattan. What's going to happen? We're going to have these ghost town skyscrapers. Like, what the fuck? What's going to happen here?
When did you leave New York? When was it just like, all right, this is ridiculous?
Well, it wasn't me. I was married to somebody, and we had a kid, and she decided the kid couldn't live in New York because she wanted them to experience nature and blah, blah. This was in 2000.
Wow, you really held out.
Yeah. And then, I realized after a while the marriage broke up, but I kind of like living up here. I don't like living in the country because the country winters kill me, but I'm in town, and that's fine. It's not a big town, but it's a comfortable town.
I mean, I was never going there until recently because I have had a lot of friends that have moved there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've lived in a lot of different cities. I think it's always good to move. I mean, for myself as a hysteria-based journalist, moving was always, I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of economics because, face it, it's just what it is. But what once was no longer is. So therefore, it doesn't really matter where you live. You live where you need to live for whatever reason at the time that you're living there.
Yeah. It helps to have friends around, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I moved so many times when I was a kid that I wanted a place where I could settle, and this house, I've been living here for 13 years, and it's the longest I've ever lived anywhere in my life.
And what about your writing process? I mean, is it hard for you to write? Do you have to force yourself, or are you just kind of out there and it's just pouring out of you all the time? I mean, as a musician, I'm like, oh, I had to practice, but you have to do it. So
my process is shambolic. Basically, I have to get myself to concentrate on something, and that's the hardest part. I suspect there's some ADHD or something like that in there, but I've never been diagnosed. But once I concentrate, then I write pretty fast.
I'm going to refer back to what Hubert Selby once said to me, because, as one of my heroes, 7 years, written twice, last exit to Brooklyn. The Room, written in 6 months. The last book he wrote, 16 years. He's like, there was a ghost in the doorway that prevented me. Jerry Stahl, Chris Campion, other writer friends of mine, 60-page outlines. I'm like, oh, that's half the book. I, like you, it's about when I get the first line, or my discipline is this: if I have a big project, I'm going to discipline a certain hourly space of time, and one sentence or 100 pages, that's when I'm going to focus on it. And that's how you get shit done. And it's like rehearsing with the musicians. Okay, I'm going to go to rehearsal at this hour and do it for this long. That's just my discipline.
Yeah.
But I don't write novels, so.
Well, it's funny that I've written 3 big books, and then like 5 books that are either smaller or collections. My 3 big books, all of them took me exactly 9 months.
Weird.
Well, no, because that might be how long it takes to do that, right?
Yeah.
I just think it's important that people know that, a discipline of time in any art is very important if you really want to get something accomplished. I mean, you could doodle diddle all you want and do what you do at the pace that you do it, but to really accomplish something, there's nothing wrong with having a discipline of time to set the pace for you to focus. And a lot of people in the COVID fog, no matter whether we have ADHD or not, have had a real problem walking through the sludge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
What do you read? Do you have time to read? I mean, I read a lot of newspaper articles because I have to keep up with the insanity, but anything you can recommend, past or present?
I barely know where to start.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
That's
Send us. You can send us a reading list. We'll
yeah,
publish
I
it.
can do that, yeah. Let's see. Larry McMurtry just died, and I'm reading his book, Walter Benjamin at the Dairy Queen, which is great. It's about Texas. And it's like, I've been to Texas like twice, and it's deep on the subject of Texas, like on his ancestors who worked this corner of Archer County where there was nothing, absolutely nothing, no trees,
Right.
just like built a world out of like paper, it's just blank slate. And he's quite a good writer. He wrote too much and all that, but when he's at his best, he's good.
One of my favorite books, if we're speaking about fiction, is Harry Cruz, and it's kind of autobiographical, a childhood biography of a place. That's absolutely one of my favorite books. I like a lot of Southern writers and playwrights as well. Very romantic, very dark. Jim Thompson. I mean, the thing is, in the 70s, a lot of people read a lot of the Jim Thompson books. Now people just have no idea who he is. And I think the movie that came out with Casey Affleck, The Killer Inside Me, was pretty hardcore and pretty much very indicative of what Jim Thompson represented or was. He would have been canceled if he came out today. Let's face it.
The Grifter is a
great book. Pop 1280. I mean, he had so many great books. And again, and writing in a time in America where people, I mean, he wrote quite a few books, underpaid like all of us, but there he went, and classics to some of us old enough to know what's actually amazing.
And his story too. I mean, the way, he started out as the sheriff's son in Anadarko, Oklahoma, and he was a communist, and he worked. Pre-COVID, my supermarket had a book exchange table, and I found his novelization of Ironside. Remember Ironside with Raymond Burr and the Wheel?
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Is there another piece or something you'd like to read for us?
I'm going to read this piece called The Seventh. It's a fragment from a novel I abandoned. The Seventh. One night, an old Pontiac, driven by an overburdened father of 6, went out of control on Avenue A and crashed into a corner building, bringing the whole thing down. The noise was overwhelming, an explosion. People came running from bars and bedrooms. The tenement, empty for years, just dissolved into a hill of bricks, from under which one solitary tail light poked out, its turn signal still for some reason pulsing red. Eventually, the cops showed up and tied off the scene with sawhorses, but by then a party had begun to take shape. Somebody had a radio, or maybe it was a cassette player, emitting charanga. Joints and bottles of Ronrico and 40s of Old English went around. Percussion started up, keys and knives on bottles tapping the clave rhythm. A man in late middle age who looked like a goat kept enjoining the crowd in a loud bray to show some respect, but nobody paid him any mind. Cop cars at night with their lights spinning around, splashing the sides of the building and visible from blocks away, nearly always put people in a party mood. By now, there were at least 100 people milling around, laughing and pointing, shrieking and clowning, quite a number of them dancing. Even the cops were getting into it. An ambulance and a fire truck arrived with another squad car. The firemen got busy digging through the rubble while the ambulance crew stood around and shot the shit with the locals. It turned out it wasn't even the second or third building collapse of the day, but the 7th. 1 in Hell's Kitchen, 2 in Chinatown, 3 in Harlem. This not counting the fires. Even as they spoke, said somebody, 2 separate tenements along Avenue C were burning, one of them for the 3rd time. What could be left of it? And how about those Mets, somebody else said. Everybody laughed, then the conversation petered out. What could anybody say? For all anybody knew, their building might be next. You really didn't want to go around to the back and see the fault lines in the brick face, or go down to the cellar and see the sag. You really, really didn't want to speculate about what your landlord might have in store or what his tax situation was like. Time passed. It seemed like the whole neighborhood had shown up. People in pajamas rubbed elbows with people in disco outfits. A guy appeared with a shaved ice setup in a shopping cart and immediately began doing a brisk business. By now, the cops had gotten to the car and were deploying mammoth pliers on the roof, trying to wrench it open. It was something to see, like mice trying to open a can of sardines, but it was taking too long. "Hey, Papi, you want a hand?" yelled a woman who looked like a 10-year-old until you saw her face up close. And some guy in the back shouted a rejoinder in Spanish that cracked up the whole crowd. Pretty soon, everybody was calling out lines at the cops the way they shouted at the screen when the movie started to drag. The cops fastidiously ignored the back chat, just as they ignored the character standing right next to them smoking chiba. Everybody who was anybody was in the crowd. The man with the crutch was all over the street. It was never clear whether he actually needed it or just used it as a stage prop. He was often, as now, seen walking normally while gesticulating with the crutch, shouting all the while. Over there, bending the ear of a young cop who was attempting to pry himself away without leaving his post, was the little man who showed up at all public functions, waving a greasy, much-folded piece of paper that may once have been an official document. His cause, an ancient and esoteric grievance, was instantly forgotten by anyone who listened to 2 minutes of it, although it seemed to keep him alive. The dirty, shirtless man with the 9 misshapen and mange-ridden dogs was there. From the look of them, you assumed a carnival of incest. And so was the maroon Swiss woman with the stainless steel hip, who regularly woke up everybody on the block calling all night for her cat, Mickey. Lolling here and there were various of those locality drunks, usually somebody's brother, who got themselves adopted by the tendency of a half-walk. So the little girls bought them jelly cakes at the bodega, and their mothers thrust sweaters upon them in October and baseball hats in June. An hour limped by while the cops kept working. Soon after the crowd hit its maximum, the excitement level started dropping fast. People went back to bed or dominoes or television, probably, but it almost looked as if they just evaporated, like spilled beer on a car hood in the sun. 1 minute, there were 50 people standing right in front of you, and then you blinked and they were gone. You could hear the music fading away down the avenue. Soon enough, there were just 3 skells left alone on the asphalt with their quart of Don Diego rum, and everybody else was spared the sight of the crushed body as the cops hauled it away on the gurney. The ambulance's doors finally slammed, and it took off at full throttle with lights spinning and sirens blasting, followed by squad cars doing likewise. You might wonder how dead a body had to be for them to slink off in silence, but most likely they were just having a little fun.
That was Luc Sante reading from his latest book, Maybe the People Would Be the Times. I want to talk just for a minute because we don't have much time left. We were there when there was a concentrated burn out of the buildings on the Lower East Side and the Bronx. Mm-hmm. And this is something that is also addressed in one of my favorite writers, Mike Davis, Dead Cities, where he talks about how cities, even from just the blight of one broken window or the many different ways that many cities were consciously by real estate agents or bankers destroyed. And in New York, that happened in the Bronx because of rent-controlled buildings where artists, queers, weirdos, immigrants were living. And they wanted it because real estate agents and bankers think in a 30-year, we think in a 30-day, can we pay our rent at the time, even if it's $75 or $125? They thought in a 30-year time limit. And then we see now what actually happened with all those burnt out buildings, because nobody who wasn't there has any understanding that this was Beirut on the Hudson. And that just paints a perfect picture of the grotesque beauty of a time now long gone. And you are my favorite forensic poet, Luc Sante.
Thank you.
This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim
Thank you,
Dahl. Another amazing episode.
Thank you.